guys. Thank you for that. And it's time now for our community segment today. We switched up a little bit this week and brought you Trek Tech on a Thursday instead of on a Wednesday. But we've got Alan Adler joining us. Alan, thank you for being here.
Thank you, guys.
And Alan, of course, coming off of vacation, that's the reason for the switch up here, but I hope you had a good one there as well. Let's talk about some interesting stuff in the headlines. Of course, we've talked a little bit about net zero carbon locomotives in California coming back, but also got pushback on CARB from trucks here as well.
Well, I think the biggest story this week is one that really won't be part of the truck tech community, but that's the decision by Too Simple to basically shut down the U.S. business. They had threatened hinted at that basically in June, and then this week said, yes, we're going to lay off another 150 employees. That's about 75% of what's left here in the U.S. And then the remaining employees will shut down the U.S. business. I've been in contact, in passing contact with Chung Lu, the CEO, and it is obviously a difficult time for them, but not entirely unexpected. They couldn't find a buyer for the business here. They really, touted their patent portfolio. They did a lot of things, I think, over the months to try to attract someone, to perhaps take on this part of the business. They're still active and growing really in China and in Asia, which is a complete reversal from what they initially intended to do when they went public via initial public offering in 2021. They have lots of money, but all that will now be spent, on developing autonomy for China, and especially in Japan has been a recent target as well.
So, Alan, of course, now this cuts out Too Simple. We have lost Waymo, and we have lost Embark here in the United States. And we've got Aurora, we've got Kodiak, we've got Plus, and we've got loosely kind of Waabi still kind of hanging out here in the autonomous space. Do we see this as now an opportunity for these other autonomous players to jump in, maybe grab some potential market share, or was Too Simple really not a big player in that? We know that they lost their partnership with Navistar last year and just couldn't quite recover.
Yeah, well, it's a little early to talk about market share, but in terms of, because they're all still in the testing stages. And so, how many shippers are working with you and things like that, allowing you to carry their loads autonomously with safety drivers is still kind of the stage we're at right now. There is, some testing with big fleets. We talked about that with Torque Robotics a few weeks ago, going from Phoenix to Oklahoma City and, testing a longer route. That's about 1,000 miles. So I think that, that's all going to continue. It's interesting. And I guess this really will get into the newsletter tomorrow a little bit with Don Burnett from Kodiak. I asked him that question. I said, okay, so we've lost 3 significant names this year. We've picked up maybe a couple. You mentioned Waabi, Kaylee, and Stack AV is another one that's kind of lurking out there. We don't know exactly what they're going to do. But he said, Don Burnett said, the comings and goings are just going to be constant. He said, it's never going to just be one player in this space. And those that can bring in new technology and get a foothold, then, probably will have a place. So we'll have a little bit about that tomorrow in an interview that I did with him after the announcement this week, where his big thing is sort of the dual use now. They have applied their technology, their Kodiak driver system, to a Ford F-150 pickup truck for the military. They even got Defense Secretary Austin out to Mountain View last week to take a look at what they're doing. This is a up to $50 million contract that Kodiak got to develop military technology with its on-highway system. So, this idea of dual use obviously helps a company like Kodiak that isn't public and is not. We don't really know their financial state. I mean, Don told me that, they're continuing to look at ways to raise money. But right now, they're still in that leader category, even though we don't have a real clear vision on their financials and their runway.
It's really interesting what you mentioned with Kodiak, especially because isn't their autonomous system was hooked up to a light-duty Ford F-150, correct?
Right, that's correct. Yeah, which really raises a lot of interesting questions, especially as we see some of the blowback on against robotaxis and the situation with Cruise that being pulled off the roads. In the U.S. now, the autonomous ride-hailing robotaxis. The idea that you could, in fact, use a system like Kodiak and their sensor pods and some of the things that they've developed on a light-duty vehicle kind of raises the question, well, what are you going to do with these? Well, for now, you're going to develop a ground system for the military, which is both kind of level 4 autonomy, but also is able to be operated, what's called teleops or teleoperated, sort of like a video game, I guess, in a way, where you can have someone move the vehicle remotely. So I think that's really the first idea, but the idea that you could, in fact, apply some of these driving robotic technologies to cars. Obviously, Waymo stayed in that space when they got out of trucking, and and Cruise, I think, wants to get back into it. I think GM CEO Mary Barra said, they're obviously having to do a pretty big reset there with that. But the idea that you could see specific uses for light duty vehicles, and again, you're seeing them in small ways with pizza delivery and things like that, and down in Texas. It isn't going away, and it's just going to continue to reinvent itself, and I think expand into different areas. It's going to be very specifically focused, though. I don't think it's going to be widespread. I think it'll be like for the military. They want to do everything they can to leverage commercial sort of applications, and instead of having to reinvent everything for the military.
So, Alan, I love that Kodiak takes this approach because I think that it's a really kind of niche approach, but it's a good one, right? You develop something that is for military use. You get it in front of the government at the very get-go, and then maybe you don't have to worry about as much work to get approval or regulatory stature or them understanding your autonomous perspective on the back end, right? Because you developed it for the government. Is that maybe one of Kodiak's really good strategies, is that they have this specific, very great foothold with the U.S. government already in a defense space, so it might make that path to commercialization a little bit easier?
Well, think of it this way. They have not announced, as Kodiak has not announced a C round yet of funding yet. Their last round was a B round, the pilot led back in 2021. They continue to grow. They've added some people. They hired for this specific project, but they also used a lot of their existing engineering talent to work on this for the government. In a sense, and I brought this to Don last time we talked about this, when they announced this grant about this program a year ago, I said, this is sort of tantamount to fundraising. And he said, well, I guess you could look at it that way because it is bringing in revenue and they are able to, work with what they're already doing. So this idea of leveraging what you've already developed, it does make a great deal of sense. And I think at this moment, from a startup perspective, in commercial autonomous trucking, to see this go this direction is interesting. You've got one other major competitor right now in the sort of military robotics space, and that's a company called RRAI, which has been working with the military for a while. Now they have some Mack trucks that they've repurposed for military use and that kind of thing. But the two of them, Kodiak and RRAI, are the two names that I'm familiar with. There may be others, but those are the two who are getting a fair amount of attention from the military on the innovation side in terms of what can we do with autonomy. We've had what's called follow the leader type activity for quite some time, dating back maybe 10 years, where you have a lead truck autonomous and then the others, have no drivers either. And so they move around, supply depots and things like that. But it's getting more sophisticated. I mentioned GM a moment ago. GM has a defense unit. They're starting to get into some of these things too. So I think the idea of commercial businesses doing things for the military is going to become more rather than less common.
It's going to be very interesting over the course of the next few years how this pans itself out. Truck Tech, of course, is new on Wednesdays, the show, and the newsletter, of course, comes out tomorrow, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, go back and watch yesterday's interview with Jim Mullen, who is the former FMCSA head. He's now running kind of a lobbying effort to slow down some of the California regulations that are coming that, I write about, John Kingston writes about. And then tomorrow, a fresh newsletter.
All right, Alan, thanks for that. Thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
All right, we'll take a short break. We'll be back with more Fort Waves Now coming up after this.